There was once a duchess, glamorous and bright, who had one dream, one goal in sight: to climb up the ranks, to be loved and respected, but her treacherous ways left her loathed and rejected. Excuse the sun featuring in this video, but finally, the inane media speculation of will they, won't they attend a coronation has come to an end. I'm sure you've all heard by now that Prince Harry will be attending the coronation all by his lonesome, and his missus will remain in Montecito, allegedly because of her son's 4th birthday party. Personally, I couldn't care less why she's not showing up, because I just don't want to see her there. I don't want her to show up, so I am happy, regardless of the reason. I don't even have to know. But that doesn't mean that I can't theorize reasons of my own, which I will be sharing with you later on in the video, because they are inextricably linked with the gems that I have discovered in Valetine Lowe's Courtiers. Yes, I've finally gotten around to reading it, and while this video won't necessarily be a review of this book, there are some nuggets in there that just slot in perfectly with this whole coronation debacle. So, we've all heard and debunked the tired old tale of woe that Meghan Markle specifically specializes in. Being the whole, oh, the royal family is like a fish and I'm this foreign organism that was rejected. But so far, most of the debunking has been limited to what we could actually see with our own eyes. For example, all the concessions that the royal family made for Meghan that were never made for any other royal bride or royal fiancé or even royal girlfriend, including Catherine, the Princess of Wales. And then there was all the care and the guidance that the couple received from the get-go, including in the planning and carrying out of their royal wedding. And of course, let's not forget those titles. I mean, how can we forget them, right? When they keep shoving them down our throats every chance they get. We've even had evidence from Jason Kanoff in which he gave the High Court examples of how much the palace not only looked out for Meghan's interests, but also those of her parents. With the most famous example of this support and protection that she claimed to never get being the scathing November 2016 statement defending her and attacking the media. As we all know, that statement was unprecedented, and it hasn't happened since. But Courtiers takes this a step further by shedding light onto just how far the palace or the firm was willing to go to accommodate the needs of both Meghan and Harry to the best of their abilities, and how despite all these efforts for years, nothing was ever good enough for Meghan Markle. Right from the get-go, Meghan sensed that she had an advantage. Being a foreigner of mixed race, a woman of color, she knew that the optics would look really bad for the palace, especially when people adored her at the time. If there was ever even a hint of her unhappiness or exclusion, even before the wedding. And she was right. The courtiers in the palace saw her as a breath of fresh air, as many of us did at the time, who would do well to modernize the monarchy and maybe open up this entire new audience, specifically of young people who could relate to her more and feel that they see themselves represented in this age-old institution. But the problem is, along with that boon that she ostensibly presented to begin with, came the uphill challenges of keeping Meghan Markle happy, which proved to be near impossible. I could go through the entire list of all the things the palace did to ensure that Meghan and Harry were happy, but I'm not going to do that because that would effectively mean I'd be reading all the relevant chapters of the book to you, which, you know, ain't nobody got time for that. But I can provide you with highlights. One of the earliest examples of the impossibility of pleasing Meghan, and by extension Harry, took place around a year after the scathing November 2016 statement was released. Right after their engagement was announced and Meghan's anonymity was well and truly a thing of the past, Meghan requested 24/7 security. Now, forgive me if I'm wrong, and correct me as well in the comment section, but my understanding is that girlfriends and fiancés are still not officially members of the royal family and are therefore not normally afforded taxpayer-funded security like the other royals are. Nevertheless, the palace took it upon itself to liaise with various government departments, including the notorious now RAVEC, who Harry is suing, for police protection, to persuade them to provide Meghan with 24/7 security. And after some persuasion, they were successful. However, these things take time, planning, all of that. And so it would have been a couple of months until Meghan could expect that protection to actually be given to her. Now, Meghan wasn't happy with this because, it's impossible to please her, because she was convinced that the palace was purposely stalling because they didn't even want to give her that protection to begin with. Which, considering what we learned from the courtiers themselves, couldn't have been further from the truth. As Valetine Lowe put it, in Harry and Meghan's view, it was still not good enough. It was a pattern that would be repeated time and time again. Now, a lot of us already know that the Queen, in showing her support for the couple, offered them one of her most trusted and beloved members of the royal household to step in as a temporary private secretary until they found a more permanent person to fill the role. And that person was Samantha Cohen. Well, let me tell you, spoiler alert, that ended up backfiring royally, forgive the pun. And I actually made a video about it back in September. It may be the misogynist, but to sum up the situation, Samantha Cohen likened working for them to working for petulant, sullen, perpetually unsatisfied teenagers who constantly complained because nothing was ever good enough for them and they were never satisfied, let alone happy. Oh, and remember that comment she made in Netflix about the palace feeding her to the wolves? Well, get a load of this. Remember that incident in Fiji back in 2018 during their Australia tour when she was pregnant, where she went to the market by herself without Harry until that visit was suddenly ended prematurely and she was hurried out of the market? Now, there have always been conflicting accounts as to why she fled, with the most famous one, which surfaced in Tom Bower's Revenge as well, being that Meghan didn't leave the UN on good terms back in, 2015, 2016, because they refused to promote her to ambassador due to her very transparently selfish motives. And because Emma Watson, her role model, was an ambassador, being an advocate wasn't good enough. And so she threw a hissy fit and quit. So the story goes that when she saw members of UN women at the market clearly wearing their blue UN vests, she didn't want to get photographed with them in the shot. So she made a run for it because she didn't want anyone to think that she was affiliated with them in any way. I mean, if it's true, it just shows you just how petty this woman is. Now, naturally, Meghan's lawyers denied this version of the story and insisted that it was a security concern. Except there's a little problem with that is exposed in Courtiers. Turns out that the Metropolitan Police, upon hearing about this incident, offered to send over a protection officer all the way to Australia, or wherever she was at the time, as extra security. But Kensington Palace, to which Meghan and Harry were still attached at the time, privately assured the Metropolitan Police that there was no security incident to worry about. So, you can choose who to believe, but let me just tell you, this team of lawyers and PR publicists that deny the UN women version of events are the same ones who insisted that Meghan Markle, innocent and naive and completely, out of the loop as she is, had no idea about the link between the diamond chandelier earrings gifted to her from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and the death, the brutal butchering of Saudi Arabian journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Earrings which she wore not once, but twice within the space of 3 weeks. Once in Fiji and once, I believe, for Prince Charles at the time's birthday. And she did this despite the public outrage once she was seen for the first time with them in Fiji. So she had no idea the first time. What's your excuse for her wearing them again 3 weeks later? And mind you, she wore these earrings against the advice of the courtiers, of the palace staff. So presumably, since she was advised not to, you'd think she would have known why. Speaking of Kensington Palace, even when Meghan and Harry decided to separate their offices from William and Catherine and set up their own office, they were offered a significant amount of space at Buckingham Palace to set up their new offices, which they rejected. It wasn't good enough for them, because what they wanted was to set up entirely separately from the establishment. The isolation had already started. And so the courtiers tried to do their bidding, but it was the Queen who stepped in, and Prince Charles, and said setting them up in the way that they want is an unnecessary extravagance and should therefore be avoided, which it was. So it wasn't the men in gray suits that rejected their demands. They were the ones bending over backwards to make them happy and to make things work for them. I'm actually appalled at how far the staff went to enable these two. But it was the Queen who stepped in and said no. And that wasn't the last time that the Queen vetoed an unreasonable extravagance from the duo. Enter the Sandringham summit. A major revelation I learned from Courtiers is that even the Megxit demands, unreasonable as they were, the half-in, half-out dream that they had, was agonized over by the palace staff of all 4 households involved. And they spent a week coming up with 5 different scenarios of how to accommodate Meghan and Harry's demands, how to give them that half-in, half-out life. The major issue with giving them what they wanted was what is called the Nolan Principles, a code of conduct for people in public life, which obviously includes members of the royal family, so how they should conduct themselves. And amongst other things, this code of conduct forbids working members of the royal family from personally profiting out of any projects that they attach themselves to publicly, which is exactly what Meghan and Harry purported to do in their new life. So you can see the clash here. It's interesting to note that the Nolan Principles are not binding, so it's not law, but they are clearly taken into very serious consideration, because with those principles in mind, and probably for other reasons, such as, not making a mockery of the monarchy and taking the role of a working royal seriously, it was the Queen who removed the notion of compromise entirely off the table, not the men in gray suits, thereby rendering this week's worth of on-the-clock, agonizing planning of how to make Meghan and Harry happy entirely obsolete. And despite all of this, which I am certain is merely the tip of the iceberg, I feel as though Valetine would have had to write volumes upon volumes if he were to include every single instance of the palace staff bending over backwards to make Meghan and Harry happy. But despite all of this, she had the audacity to sit there on Oprah and to sit there, for the Netflix docuseries and lie through her teeth. Or maybe she's not lying, maybe she's so delusional in the head that she believes what she says, but essentially telling us that the palace did nothing to accommodate her because they were jealous and racist and sexist, when the truth is the exact opposite, which it usually is with the likes of Meghan Markle. Whatever they say, consider the opposite to be true. Now, we've heard this before, but the book confirms that there was a general consensus amongst several of the palace courtiers that Meghan Markle had joined the royal family with an exit strategy already planned. To quote directly from the book again, one courtier says, "We were having to prove that the institution would bend over backwards to make her happy." That wasn't what she wanted. She wanted to be rejected. And when you consider her patterns of behavior, there actually is a lot of evidence to back up this theory. For instance, she basically went to the UK with the clothes on her back, because we know that she left all of her belongings, all of her clothes, back in Toronto, I think, and instructed Jessica Mulroney and a few others to put everything she owned into storage. And as if that wasn't enough, she retained her US team of lawyers, her business advisors, her agent, and of course, her PR people. And all of these people eventually started to interfere with the palace staff, who were now tasked with working for Meghan and supporting her and doing all these tasks that her US team was still doing. So there was a clash, and eventually Meghan and her US team iced out the palace staff and effectively left them blindsided every time they decided to do something. They kept the palace staff out of the loop, even when Meghan was still a full-time working royal. So if she truly had any genuine interest and intentions of permanently staying in the UK, of giving up everything and leaving her old life and her career behind, why would she do all of this? And it didn't just stop there. Things get a lot more calculated and sinister. Remember all the Oprah allegations of her being suicidal and seeking help from human resources? Well, first of all, it's imperative to point out to anyone who doesn't know that human resources were responsible for the palace staff, for employees. That's where they went for help or issues, not members of the royal family as Meghan Markle is. And you'd think a woman nearing 40 who was quite experienced, a working woman, would have known that. So why ask them for help when, say, she could have asked Harry's therapist or Diana's close friend, I believe, who was also a psychotherapist, whom Meghan name-dropped during the Oprah interview? Or perhaps even Prince Charles, whom she apparently enjoyed a close and loving relationship with. There were so many people she could have turned to for help, and she chose to go to HR? Well, the palace staff have a very plausible theory, in my opinion, about why she did this. And as cynical and calculated as it sounds, unfortunately, it does add up. And don't forget, people thought that the narrative of Amber Heard planning, her exit strategy from her marriage with Johnny Depp as far back as when they first met seemed far-fetched to many. But at the end of the day, Johnny Depp ended up being victorious, because with these people, this is how they operate. It may sound far-fetched to the likes of us normal folk, but every single moment of the likes of Amber Heard and Meghan Markle are calculated, pre-planned, with a very sinister goal in mind. So, in this instance, this is the palace staff's theory. By the time the Oprah interview aired, they were convinced, based on working with her for years, that even the most heartfelt pleas for help, including this HR story, were all part of a grand scheme to use later as a trail of evidence leading up to her eventual departure. And to quote from the book again, because I believe this is very poignant, everyone knew that the institution would be judged by her happiness. The mistake they made was thinking that she wanted to be happy. She wanted to be rejected because she was obsessed with that narrative from day one. Interestingly, another revelation from the book, at least one person saw through this facade seemingly from day one, or at least early on, if not from the get-go. Samantha Cohen, as you remember, once one of the Queen's most trusted aides, insisted from very early on that the palace retain evidence of all of the duty of care that they showed the couple. So everything they've done to accommodate them and take care of them and support them. According to the Courtiers, she repeated this notion like a parrot. It was that important to her, because unlike the others, she may have seen the disaster that was looming in the horizon. And now we can turn our attention to the current situation of Meghan's decision not to attend the coronation. First, let me get something off my chest, okay? It's a little bit of a rant. One thing I really hate is clickbait. And along with that comes this refusal to let things die out just for the sake of stirring up more drama and more controversy, leading to more clicks and more revenue. I'm not about that life. Because first, everyone was saying, don't you dare show your face at the coronation, you two. Myself included, and I still stand by that. I'm not too thrilled about Harry being there, but at the end of the day, if it's gonna be a quick in and out, keep a low profile, support your father, who am I to say anything against that? I mean, at the end of the day, he's his son, even though it's not a family affair, it's a state affair. However, what the media is doing now is essentially, doing a 180 and going from, you better not show your face here, Meghan, to, how dare you snub the king? I mean, come on. Sometimes the media is so spot on about Meghan, it bolsters their credibility. We're all not fans of the media in general, but when they get it right, it's a good thing, which they frequently do when it comes to exposing the antics of Meghan and Harry. But this flip-flopping around to stir up controversy, it's only going to play into her narrative of, no matter what I do, it's going to be viewed unfavorably, and I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. Because she'd be right in this instance. We've spent months warning her not to come or expressing our desires for her not to show up. And then now you get things like the front page cover of The Sun basically accusing her of betraying the king and not being there for him. I mean, come on. Who is she to have any significant impact on the king's well-being, especially on such an important day? I mean, his son, I get it. But her? You're giving her too much credit from the way I see it. So I think this is all ridiculous. I'm glad that she's not coming, full stop. I haven't changed my mind. I don't care that there'll be less content to cover because she won't be there. It's not about that. Now we can get to what I hinted at earlier in the video about the reasons, my theories for Meghan's absence. As I said earlier, many are speculating that it's because the day of the coronation happens to land on Archie's 4th birthday. I don't buy that. It's a 4-year-old, he's not gonna remember when his birthday is, and besides, what a great gift it would have been for her son to be there at his grandfather's coronation. I mean, how many other grandchildren can say that? That my grandfather is getting coronated. And not to mention the fact that they didn't have a problem celebrating Lilibet's 1st birthday around the time of the Jubilee. They went there, took their children, and had a little party. They could have done the same thing. So that's not the reason, in my opinion. I ain't buying it. Others say that it's Catherine, Princess of Wales, who put her foot down and said there is no way that she's going to be there next to me or on the balcony or, etc., which is a rumor because, we don't have any evidence to substantiate that or to refute it. But it doesn't seem to sit in well with Princess Catherine's personality. Obviously, I don't know her, I've never met her, but you get a read, for people, and it just doesn't seem like something she would say, or at least something that she would openly say and enforce on her father-in-law's special day. It seems out of character, but you let me know. Now, others say that Meghan is aware of how hypocritical it will seem if she showed up, and so, because she is a dignified woman of taste and decorum, she decided to sit this one out. And to that I say, if this woman had any dignity, an ounce of it within her, then for starters, would she have done everything that she has done over the past 4 years or so? Like constantly spinning lie after lie, threat after threat, selling out her own family for a quick buck or to make herself look good. To me, that behavior doesn't accord in any way whatsoever with someone who is dignified and, has decorum and class and knows how to read the room. I think her behavior at the Jubilee last year with the rolling down the window and that big fake smile and parading herself at church cosplaying as Wallace Simpson shows that she is unable to read the room. Here's what I think. I think that Meghan Markle is someone who is used to getting her way her entire life. She feels entitled to every single thing that she desires, every single thing that she hasn't earned. We know this from Tom Barra's Revenge, where he went through example after example of how she would grovel to get invitations, to conferences and summits and just events and appearances, even though she was a nobody who had nothing to offer and nothing to do with these events. And on the off chance the organizers said, okay, sure, we don't know Meghan Markle, but sure, she would then go on to insist on a first-class ticket and the best hotel in the city. We saw this happen with her Reitman's ad, where she insisted on the fanciest hotel, a Dior bathrobe, Aquazzura, Altazura, I don't even know what the brand's called, shoes that she ended up effectively stealing, apparently. I think that all of the demands that were circulating the past few months about appearing on the balcony, Prince Archie getting a special acknowledgement for his birthday during a state affair such as a coronation, being part of the procession, being placed front and center, the demand for a public apology, a la Ngozi Fulani. I think that every single one of those demands were rejected. Gone are the days of the palace bending over backwards to make Miss Markle happy. It appears that the tide has finally turned. So In summary, I think that the demands being rejected, coupled with the possibility of having to curtsy to Catherine and William and other higher ranking royals, coupled with no tiara, potentially being hidden behind another candlestick or being seated all the way in Iceland, as the British media likes to call it, and of course, a very likely, almost certain repetition of the booing that they received at the Jubilee Thanksgiving service, all of that culminated in her resisting the very strong urge to show her face at such a historical event to refill that royal clout. She wouldn't be showing her face there as a display of solidarity or to support her husband, who seems to be an emotional wreck when she's not around because there's some weird codependency going on there. No. Meghan Markle only does what suits her. We've exposed her for years and years. And finally, what used to be an uphill battle with accusations of jealousy and misogyny and racism being hurled at us, left, right, and center. Everyone sees her for who she really is. And she's not wanted. Not in Hollywood, not in the royal family. So here we have a woman who so desperately wanted to be rejected from the get-go in furtherance of her own sinister, selfish goals, only to end up actually being rejected by practically the entire world. All I can say is, karma, you've done it again. Be careful what you wish for, folks. Or I should probably say what you plan for, because that's technically what she did. So.